Okay, Chris, thank you for joining me. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. How are you doing today?
I am good, recouping after kind of a crazy week here in Texas.
Yeah,
Um,
seriously.
yeah, so obviously you are Chris. Give us kind of the high level. When were you at App Academy? What are you doing now? Where are you? All the
Um, so I went to App Academy in the August of 2018 cohort. I'm currently an engineering team lead at Synac, which is a cybersecurity company based out of Redwood City, California.
okay. When you say cybersecurity, just for people who don't know, what is it that you kind of do on like a day-to-day basis?
Me or my company?
Both? All the above?
So what my company does is we are a crowdsourced penetration testing, more or less, crowdsourced penetration testing company. So a company gets a contract with us. Say App Academy gets a contract with us. We Our goal is to then test and identify how secure App Academy's website is. So we expose some set of their website, like appacademy.com, whatever, to a distributed group of hackers that we have background checked, vetted, who are distributed around the world. They go through a proprietary platform. They go through a proprietary VPN. They hack against appacademy.com. Whatever vulnerabilities they find, they submit to a platform on our website. We confirm them and then send those vulnerabilities along to App Academy.
So these are people, so you find actual hackers, like that's their job and
Yep.
it's legal and everything?
Yep. These are white hat hackers who are choosing to use their skill set in a legal way.
Yeah. Uh, See, these are all things that I'm still learning now that I'm a part of this whole industry. I just, you hear the word hacker and I think you would just assume people that are doing wrong, but that's super cool. Speaking of very cool, pre-App Academy, you had a very interesting job as a fencing coach.
Yeah, I was a fencing coach. I owned a fencing club in San Carlos, California. I was coaching for about 9 years, doing it at a pretty high level. I was coaching kids who were as good as in the top 32 in the world under the age of 17, one over 50 world champion, a number of students that have gone on to Ivy League schools, some pretty high level athletes.
That's awesome. And so you were doing that obviously for, nearly a decade. And then you decided to retire. What kind of led to that decision?
Um, I like I like solving problems, and when you're coaching sports, the problems are the same. The question is, how do you teach someone to do something at a high level? But once you, and solving that question and solving that problem is very interesting. But once you have solved that problem, there's not a new problem behind it. There is just teaching the same concepts to a new child. The advantage of working in software is you're facing new challenges every day.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I made a note here that last time we talked, you mentioned you had friends that were engineers. It was kind of a natural transition, but also because you are, as you say, an engineering minded person, things like that, problem solving, applying kind of the same ideology, the same principles to different issues, which is a huge part of being an engineer. So it's interesting that you kind of make that connection between being a coach to now your job in software engineering, but also there's people that don't necessarily have that skill. Um, so so that's super interesting. Um, and was a boot camp always kind of the trajectory that you were going to take when you decided that you wanted to go into this
Yeah, it
profession?
was always the best option for me. The choice between a $20,000 boot camp and depending on how you count, $150,000 4-year degree,
Right.
both in upfront cost as well as opportunity cost is really astronomical. And depending on what you're trying to do in the software world, uh, going to a boot camp is a totally fine option for me.
Yeah, yeah. I think time is money too, and so for folks like who've been in a career, and time is kind of the essence. That's super helpful too. That
Mhm.
can just kind of get it done in a few months, 6 months, half a year, whatever it may be, and just kind of jump right into the job search process. So, so you knew you wanted it to be a boot camp. Why App Academy?
With App Academy, I liked the idea that of the income share model. I liked the fact there was an option of having no tuition up front. I didn't take that option. I chose to pay up front because it's significantly cheaper that way. But I like the accountability to the students and to the curriculum that App Academy is forced to have if they're going to offer that as an option.
Totally. And so, speaking of kind of putting merit in our curriculum, did you find it useful when you came out of the program? Like, were the principles and the languages and the things you learned useful when you kind of made the transition?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of how I want to answer that. In terms of like language and technology, App Academy, at least when I went through it, was Ruby on Rails, React Redux, which is still a common tech stack that companies use. Ruby on Rails, React Redux as the primary tech stack. So obviously that's the same. I think App Academy does a very good job of teaching you the baseline skills that you then need to expand on in order to be like successfully employed in the industry. Like you're not going to go do a 12-week long boot camp and immediately know nearly as much as what other like people working in the industry will, but it will give you enough of a framework that you can go and like continue to learn on your own, and then certainly be employable as in a junior role pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, you know, I don't think that should be anybody's expectation. So, I think it's our job, not only as App Academy, but in boot camps in general, to make that distinction. Because you do see that sometimes, people being like, I went to, after a boot camp, can I move into a senior role? No, no, that's not the case. But you said something yesterday when we talked last, rather, that caught my attention. Um, and you said that you never worked as hard as you did in those first 12 weeks, and you think it's important for future students to know that. So I think I'd love to hear kind of your elaboration on that. You also mentioned that like
Sure.
everyone around you was working just as hard, and that was something important that you noted. So I think it's good that we touch on it. This is not, it's not easy. It's not like just jumping into any other kind of class or anything like that. So can you touch on that?
Yeah. So I knew going into App Academy that there was a roughly 20% attrition rate. The numbers I was quoted before joining App Academy were that 90% of people who graduate are employed within a year, and 80% of people that start the program finish the program. 20% is a reasonably high attrition rate. And I think in my head, my expectation would be that meant that 20% of people that started were not going to be really serious. And that was not generally what actually happened. Almost everyone that joined my cohort was extremely serious. Almost everyone worked extremely long hours, worked extremely hard. 20% of them failed anyway. Actually, in my cohort, it was much closer to 30%. I want to say 28% failed out. And that wasn't from lack of working hard. It was generally just from they weren't able to do quite well enough. I think everyone, or almost everyone, with a couple exceptions, probably worked 85 plus hours a week for the first 9 weeks, and that's a lot of hours. If you haven't actually worked in a really focused way for that kind of hours before, it's not similar to being in college. It's more similar to being like in med school or being a medical resident in terms of workload. It's more similar to that than it is to being an undergrad student.
Yeah, that's an interesting comparison that I haven't heard, but it makes sense based on what you're saying, and obviously the messaging that gets put out about boot camps. It's especially ones that are a little bit more condensed. You know, it, People are not strangers to working 100 plus hours a week, and when you
Yeah,
hear that,
certainly.
it sounds really daunting, considering you only have so many in a week, but in order to kind of get from point A to point B and to make that jump from boot camp, from studying to a real full-time job, a career that has a trajectory, When you think about it in those terms, it makes it a little bit more manageable, I think. But that's not to say that it's not super difficult when, you know, when you're in it.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
the way Academy is set up is if you don't exceed, or if you don't excel rather, then you will fail. There's really no room to be in the middle. You're either going to do extremely well
Mhm.
or you will fail out of the program. And
Okay.
to do extremely well means some combination of having spent a zillion hours before the program started learning these technologies, and working in software, and or working 100-hour weeks while you're in the program, or for a lot of people, both.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you think it would be helpful to have some prior knowledge for people? Did you have any before you started?
Prior knowledge of what exactly?
Languages, principles, like
Um, so I was programming for a year and a half before I applied to App Academy.
okay.
I had built some reasonably complex games, mainly in Python and a little bit in Ruby.
Nice.
The people who did the best in the program are the people that had the most experience with software beforehand. So the strongest person in my cohort was 19. He had been programming since he was 10. Another very strong candidate had been um, he'd been working in Ruby on Rails before coming to App Academy. So the more experience people had coming in, the better they did.
19-year-old. That's crazy. And so was there a pretty good age range when you were, within your program?
Um, yeah, so he actually turned 19 during my program. He started the program when he was 18, but he was the youngest. I think the oldest was probably early 50s. The majority of people were mid 20s. I
Yeah,
was on the slightly older side. I think I started the program right after I turned 30, and I was slightly on the older side.
sure. That makes sense. So, you graduated from App Academy, and you had talked about when you were going through the job search process, which is a pretty brutal process from my understanding, that you kind of applied your own sort of application tracking process. I think that would just be interesting for people to hear about kind of how you went about seeing patterns in your applications and all that kind of stuff.
Sure. So I tracked, not using any software, just using Google Sheets. I
Yeah.
tracked every application that I sent, which of those led to a phone screen, which of those led to a coding challenge, which of those led to a follow-up screen, and which of those led to an onsite. And the biggest reason why I did this was A, just to know what the results were looking like, but also to figure out how successful things were
Yeah.
and what I should expect. Because one really uh, unusual part of applying for jobs certainly relative to everything else in software, is the results are very much not immediate. So in software, if you type some code and hit run, you'll find out very quickly whether or not it works. And that's not the case with applying to jobs. If you apply to a job, I would say the average time for hearing back from them, even if you're getting a phone screen, like if your application is successful, the average time is probably between 1 to 3 weeks,
Yeah.
which means that you can send 100 applications in a week, hear nothing back, and that doesn't actually mean that you're doing anything wrong. So by getting some metrics on this, actually like figuring out what the expected value was of every application I sent, that was made it a lot easier for me to send out 20 job apps in a day and know that I can expect one successful phone screen to come out of this.
Yeah. Did you find any patterns just from these learnings? Did you find any patterns in the types of companies that you were applying for, or the types of roles or anything like that?
Um,
Or it was just sort of like, I know based on,
Trying to think if there's any patterns. Certainly things that were just as simple at the lower the barrier to entry to apply, the lower the success rate of applying was. If it was just something as simple as just drop us your resume, my success rate there was lower. Things that were a little more arduous of an application process, for smaller companies, the response rate was higher.
yeah. Yeah, and I think that, I mean, tech especially, but I think that that's kind of the case across, any sort of job industry. Um, People tend to fall off when there's more difficult resumes in front of, or rather applications in front of them.
Yeah.
Things like answering a lot of questions up front, screening questions, that type of stuff, just because it's time consuming.
Yeah.
But when it comes to getting a job, that's kind of the point. So, um, well, that's great. And just to kind of wrap things up, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me and hopefully some prospective students. Do you have any advice for those future students?
Um,
Anything, parting words of wisdom you want to leave them with?
yeah. Nothing real inspiring or anything too well thought out,
It doesn't have.
but some of it is a go to App Academy if you want to work extremely hard for 3 months and learn a lot. Uh, don't go in thinking this will be fun. Let's see what happens. Uh, Go in if you're prepared for a really long process where that is your sole focus for that time. People talk about it a lot, and I think people often don't take it quite seriously enough. The like take it seriously enough in advance. The idea that while you're at App Academy, this will be the primary focus of your life. Everything else you do will revolve around App Academy, with basically no exceptions. The only other bit of advice I would say is do the prep work, be as well versed in all the prep work as you possibly can be. Go through it once, go through it a second time, a third time, whatever it takes to actually understand it, because the program expects that you know all the prep work quite well by the time the program starts. It is not a 0 to 60 class. The 12 weeks App Academy is not a 0 to 60 class. It is closer to a 30 to 60 class that expects that you know a lot by the time day one starts. And the only other bit of advice I would have is get a lot of rest before the program starts. Be well rested on day one, because you will likely be less well rested for the rest of the time.
Little sleep, a lot of work. Those are
Yep,
some good parting words. Chris, thank you so much. As there's a plane flying overhead, probably a
of
good
course.
time to wrap it up here. But I appreciate you sitting down with me and look forward to talking with you soon.